If you're watching this video, then chances are you probably were looking for answers, in much the way I was, and maybe you still are looking for answers. So who am I? Well, let me tell you who I'm not. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just an ordinary, average guy that had some health issues and decided to address them. Some of you may have come here looking for weight loss or answers to type 2 diabetes or hypertension, cardiovascular disease. The list goes on as to what ailment you're looking for answers for. Chances are that mainstream medical isn't giving you the answers or helping you, and so you're looking for alternative ways of helping yourself. Well, my journey began about 15 years ago. I was about 250 pounds and decided it was time to get myself back to normal. I tried pretty much most of the diets out there. I had done Weight Watchers and just constantly felt hungry. I tried the low-fat diet and was very similar. Now, I did lose weight on both of those, but it was only like 5 or 10 pounds, and then that was as far as I could go because I couldn't take it anymore. And then about probably 12 years ago, I started researching diet and nutrition to understand why I had gained the weight I had when, in my mind, I hadn't really changed my eating habits all that much. But the truth is, I actually did. Getting married and having kids, working long distance from home, a lot of processed and fast foods became a staple in our family. So the McDonald's, the Pizza Hut, the Wendy's, Burger King, Banquet, Swanson's, all of those things became normal for us, and we may have had what we consider a normal meal once or twice a week. Fast forward about 4 years ago, I came across Carnivore and decided to try it, and I lost a good amount of weight. Why I didn't stick with it, I couldn't tell you. But we mainly ate pretty healthy. We still ate some fast food occasionally, not as much as we had before. We were more making meals during the week, and maybe once or twice on a weekend we'd eat out. Maybe once in a while at lunch I'd eat out. But then about 6 months ago, I was opening a jar of mayonnaise, and all of a sudden a pain shot through my hand that was so bad it almost dropped the mayonnaise jar. And my first thought was, well, I tore a tendon or did something in my hand. I'd had tendonitis before in my elbow, so I didn't really put a whole lot of stock into it. Just figured I'd mess something up, that over a few months it would heal just like my elbows would. But then I got to the point where in the beginning of February I couldn't hardly hold my cell phone. I couldn't open anything with my hands. I had used one hand, and with the type of work I do, I have to have both of my hands. I install heating and air conditioning equipment, boilers, water heaters, things like that. And so having the use of my hands is very important. What finally got me to go to the doctor was one night I was playing cards with my brother and sister-in-law, and after about 10 minutes of holding cards, I couldn't hold them anymore. It hurt so bad, I just couldn't do it. I had to play my hand off the table. And it was at that point I decided to go and make an appointment. So I go into the doctor, and he starts examining my hand, and he's pushing down in here, and nope, there's no pain, no pain. And all of a sudden he pushed right here, and I about hit the floor. It hurt so bad. So they scheduled me for x-rays, thinking maybe I broke something. X-rays came back a couple days later, and then is when I got the news that I had a degenerative bone disease. My particular form was osteoarthritis. I have a sister-in-law who has had osteoarthritis, and when she was in her 50s she had to have hip replacement surgery, knee replacement surgery, and I knew I didn't want to go down that road. So my first thought was, okay, let's see if we can do something about this with diet, at least keep it from progressing. So I started searching on YouTube for answers, and one of the people I'd followed off and on was Dr. Ken Berry, and he just happened to have a video that was specific to arthritis. So I watched the video, and his advice was to do Carnivore to help heal the bones and the cartilage, which, you know, if you've done any research on that, I tell you, it can't be done. Once you lose it, it's irreversible. So that was probably, I think, on a Wednesday or Thursday. By Monday, I'd gone straight to carnivore. That's been about 11 weeks ago. I'm down 27 pounds. The pain in my hand is going away. I only have about 40% of the pain that I had before. I can use my hand at work. I can open jars again. I can hold my cell phone. It's been pretty wild. But when you start researching the carnivore diet and the things that people have either brought under control or even cured, it's kind of fascinating. And the more you delve into it, the more you realize that we've been lied to for 50, 60 years about our diet and how we're supposed to eat. And once I started really looking at the carnivore diet, I started to think back to my grandparents and what they did and where they lived. And they had a farm. It wasn't a big one, but they had a farm, a little over 100 acres. But I can remember my grandmother always cooked with lard. They always had fresh food. And my grandfather, he was 90-some years old and died at home in bed. So it got me thinking that maybe how previous generations had eaten prior to the advent of refrigerators, freezers, and ways to preserve food. How did they eat? What did they eat? And you go back, we've only had refrigerators for about 100 years as far as in the homes. And you had to think about, well, what were these people eating? Because they couldn't put anything, that was not shelf stable in any kind of environment to last through a winter. So most of these people, they ate meat during the winter. They had cold storage, with fruit cellars where they could keep things like potatoes, onions, and apples. But you weren't keeping bananas or peaches or anything like that. Green beans, none of that was going to last. So you have to realize that these people were eating a meat-heavy diet at that time. And even canning really wasn't a mainstream thing until the mid to late 1800s. So up to that point, whatever you could put into cold storage, you would have, and then the rest of the time you ate meat. Now, even their bread was primarily either sourdough or hardtack. The wheat that we had back then is vastly different than what we have now. And I don't want to get into that right now as to why there's a difference, but crossbreeding, genetic modifications, things like that has changed our wheat from what it was that our ancestors ate to what it is now. Addition to that is the use of pesticides and chemicals and genetic engineering on our foods. You have things like broccoli, which doesn't occur in nature. Our corn that we have now doesn't occur in nature. It doesn't even resemble what was here when the country was founded. So you have to look at these things and realize that what we're eating on a daily basis is not what we were intended to eat. Our ancestors would have been hunter-gatherers. They would have eaten meat primarily throughout the year, whether that was fish they could get or any game that they could capture. Any fruits or honey or anything like that would have been limited to a month or two in the summer or late summer when it was ripe and had access to it. The advent of agriculture, which brought us the grains, was really the start of all of the chronic issues we have. If you go back through the fossil record, prior to us being an agricultural society, there was no record of cancer or coronary heart disease or type 2 diabetes. Very rarely was there any indication of obesity. Anybody who was obese was somebody who was wealthy because they could afford the sugars and things that the average person couldn't afford. And in fact, up until the Industrial Revolution, when they figured out how to mass produce sugar, the average person didn't have a whole lot of sugar because it was highly expensive. And if they did have any, they hid it. And if you look into old spice boxes from the 1800s, 1700s, you'll find there's a hidden compartment that they would put a little cone of sugar in. And they really guarded that because it was so expensive. So, you fast forward to what we have now, and it really just, I don't know, overwhelms me or floors me about these studies that come out about how Neanderthals were vegetarians. It's impossible because they didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have vegetation all year round unless they lived around the equator, places where it was warm all year long. But where the Neanderthals lived, and even I'm going to see if I can pronounce this right, Devonians lived, was in Europe. So you only had a couple of months that you could have these the vegetation and the fruits and vegetables that you could eat. And you look at some of the vegetables we eat now, like potatoes and tomatoes. When those were first introduced as a food, people thought they were poisonous, so they wouldn't eat them. And I think there's a lot of vegetation that falls into that category that, while we can tolerate it to an extent, I don't think that means it's necessarily intended for us to eat, that it has the nutritional value that we get out of meat. Meat has everything we need. And I think one of the biggest concerns that I get from people when they find out I'm doing carnivore is this notion that I'm going to get scurvy. Well, you're not eating fruits and vegetables, you're going to get scurvy. No, that's not true. Meat has vitamin C in it. The difference is that when you don't consume carbohydrates, your body doesn't require as much vitamin C. So the vitamin C that is present in meat is enough. And then I get people that point back to the sailors, well, they always had scurvy, but they ate meat. Well, it was different because the meat they had was dried meat or smoked meat or salt pork, and then they had hardtack. So it wasn't fresh meat. So when you cure the meat like that, it depletes the vitamin C in it. So yeah, they got scurvy because they didn't have fresh meat. But just understanding that what we've been told is not accurate is really leading a lot of people down this road. I think that as time moves forward, we're going to start seeing this get more and more mainstream as more and more people learn about it, and people start fixing these diseases that are chronic and a result of the diet that we have. And some of the organizations out there that have perpetuated a lot of these lies are now even starting to say that, well, maybe saturated fat wasn't the bad guy after all. And I go back to a book that I read. It was written by Dr. John Yudkin back in 1972. And in his book, he details how the consumption of sugar will lead to cancers and coronary heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. And we look at today, and everything that he said in this book, 50 years ago is coming true. So, it's kind of prophetic that this guy knew what was going to happen and everybody ignored him. Instead, they followed Ansel Keys, who was a bully, and says, oh, it's saturated fat because, Eisenhower ate hamburgers and cheeseburgers all the time and he had a heart attack. Well, yeah, but he also smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. So I don't think it was necessarily the hamburger that did it. It's probably the cigarettes that did it. And a lot of these studies that they come out with, they're anecdotal studies. So they give these people that are going to participate a sheet that they have to keep track of what they eat every day. And let's face it, people are going to lie because they don't want people to know that they ate a half a pint of ice cream in a night or had cake or cookies or whatever, when the diet's supposed to be tracking certain things that they're supposed to be consuming. People are going to forget to fill it out, and they'll be, oh geez, what did I have last Tuesday? I know I had this and this, and they're going to forget something. So unless it's a controlled environment that people are in where their diet is actually controlled, you can't really put stock into these anecdotal studies. How physically active are people? What environment do they live in? Do they drink alcohol? Do they smoke? Do they do any kind of drugs? Are they constantly popping pills? These all factor into this, and that's not the kind of thing they're taking into account when they do these studies, the supposed studies. There have been 3 studies um, in the past that were controlled. One was a veteran study, one was a Minnesota women's study, and one was a Framingham study. In all three of them, they were trying to prove that saturated fats caused coronary heart disease. But the opposite is actually what happened. And it's only been recent that all of the data from these studies have been brought to light. So you have to look at these things and go, okay, this isn't adding up. And when you have a sick populace like we have, 70% of the people are obese, and God knows how many have diabetes, cancer, I mean, just, it's a laundry list. And nothing has been done in the medical community to fix it. You have to kind of take a step back and go, okay, well, what caused this? Not how are we going to prescribe a pill to treat the symptoms, how do we reverse all of this? And it goes back to Hippocrates, where let food be thy medicine, and that's true. So your food has to be where you start. And it's frustrating when you see people suffering and you say, hey, have you thought about this? Just try it for a couple weeks and see if it helps. And they completely write it off because they think they can't do it, or I'm going to miss my vegetables, or I got to have bread, what about this, what about that? And it just comes down to, you have to be at the point where you're at the end of your ropes, nothing is working, you don't want to be over medicated, and you got to make that decision to go, okay, well, there's a bounty of evidence from people out there that have done this and are curing what's been ailing them, and they're coming off of medications. Maybe there's something to it. It doesn't hurt to try it. Maybe carnivore is not for you, maybe keto works for you. But you have to start at the beginning, which is eliminating any possibility of a food having a reaction with your body. And until you do that, you're not going to know what's causing your problem. I encourage anybody who is having any kind of medical issue to try it. It doesn't hurt, it's not going to kill you, you're going to be just fine, you're going to be healthier, you're going to sleep better, you're going to lose weight, that's the biggest bonus. You're going to have more energy, more clarity. It's just amazing what it does for you. And if you're one of those people that is the but what if, I'm this and that, you can either make excuses or you make changes. It's your choice. No one can force you to do it, but you're going to see, I would say within the next 5, maybe 10 years, that whole food pyramid is going to flip. And it's going to be a gradual thing, because if they were to come out right now and say, oh, we got it wrong, how many millions of people have died from manageable diseases because the food pyramid is wrong? And all the advice that's been given out by the American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, the National Cancer Society, all the information that they've put out to people, admitting that that was wrong, what do you think that's going to do? Look at big tobacco. I see the same thing happening. People are going to start suing these people because they've lost loved ones due to the advice they gave them that was wrong. And it kind of falls back on the government in the 70s when they started this whole food pyramid thing. They ignored the scientists who said we need more time to understand the data, to run to run these experiments to see exactly what is causing all this before we make a recommendation. But because you had people on this panel who were interested parties, farm co-ops that were like the wheat organization, the sugar organization, these big powerful lobbies that pushed McGovern to adopt the food pyramid and support the farmers, was wrong. They supported the wrong farmers. They should have supported the cattle industry and the pork industry and the poultry industry, and not these grains that are detrimental to our health. So, if you really want to make a change and fix things, I encourage you to do some research on the carnivore diet. Look up people like Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Blickman. I mean, the list goes on and on of all these people, but those are probably the most prominent physicians that can make recommendations and kind of guide you through how to do all this. I'll do videos about things that's going on with me, just different information that I come across just to keep you informed. So if you want to follow me, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. I'm just putting information out there as a regular guide and what I've experienced, what I'm going to experience, and hopefully help somebody out, maybe steer them in the right direction to fix whatever's wrong with them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe it's a little informative. It might have been a little bouncing around at different things, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought and some things to research and look up for yourself. So hope you enjoyed it.